organisational psychologist at Trueman Change, and we specialise in helping local government organisations to go through change and transformation. This has been our by far most popular change chat that we've ever done. We've got 98 people registered on it, so I think we've definitely hit that this is a topic that everybody's worrying about at the moment. So what we want to do today is basically, we've been doing some research around this area and specifically around what the impact will be on staff, on residents, on sort of the people, the human impact of local government reorganisation. So the reason that we've got a slide deck for you, we don't normally go to that level of formality, but we wanted to sort of break down the themes and the findings of what we've come to as a result of that research. It's a very informal session, although we do have a bit more structure than we do usually. We are absolutely open for this being a discussion. I am conscious of the political sensitivity of it. So if you would like to ask a question and you're comfortable unmuting and asking, that's absolutely fine. We are recording and you will be recorded as part of asking that question. If you'd rather not be recorded because of political sensitivities, just send myself or Georgia Turner a private message and we will ask that question anonymously for you with no identifying details. We don't normally go to such extents. We're normally quite chilled out on these, but I am very conscious that this is potentially quite politically sensitive, and particularly talking about the impact on people and so on. So do feel free to use that if you feel that you want to ask something without necessarily showing your face or your name. So thank you for joining us. I'm joined today by two of my colleagues. So we've got Georgia Turner on the call, who is our associate principal around comms and engagement, and we also have Rachel Walker, who's our associate all around local government policy. And it is the three of us that have been doing the research, so we're the ones that have been doing the interviews. So I'll be pulling Rachel and Georgia in to add just a bit of richness in terms of what we found and some examples. And as I said, ask questions. If there's anything particular you want us to explore in more detail, that's absolutely fine. And I'm going to just launch in, if that's okay, and share what we've found so far. So hopefully you can see a presentation. Has it moved on a slide? Because I can't see. Perfect. Okay, so what we've done, so our background, as I said, is all around change and transformation. And my background is all around psychology, how to do change well. And we really wanted to have a look at this particular topic through that lens, because I think there's a lot of good stuff out there around how to do this in a safe and legal way, what the process will be, what the milestones will be. But I think sometimes with stuff as big and significant as this, it's hard to keep a grasp on that human side as you go through the process. So we put out a request for people to take part in that research. My background in research is very qualitative and thematic analysis in its style. So that's the methodology that we went with. We've interviewed over 25 people that are all senior officers in local government, and they were a range of job titles in terms of levels, but they were also a range of specialism. So we've interviewed chief execs, we've interviewed people from IT, we've interviewed heads of service, we've interviewed people that were about delivering services, and also lawyers and all sorts of people that have been part of this journey in the past. And we conducted a thematic analysis, which means that we went through all of that data and drew out what key themes were repeated across those interviews. We specifically explored topics such as culture, communications, engagement. We talked about service redesign, recruitment and retention, basically the overall experience for our staff and managers as they go through this really significant journey. And then what I've also done is married that up with various psychology models that are not specific to local government reorganisation, but there is an awful lot of organisational psychology research out there about really crucial things like identity, mergers, acquisitions from the wider public and private sector. There's been loads of research about what happens to people and what they experience as they go through this journey. So the plan is to share that kind of stuff with you, and hopefully that is relevant and useful. And as I said, any questions at all, just feel free to put your hand up or drop us a note. So The first thing we've tried to do is break this down into 3 stages. And one person who I interviewed actually said, like, everybody says the phrase, this is a marathon, not a sprint, but actually it's kind of a triathlon because there are these 3 distinct phases. And I think that the impact on people of those 3 stages are different, and it's worth having that in mind. So the first stage, which is where we are now for people that are going through it now, is that kind of highly political stage, where what people will see and experience is people at a political level having that debate about where the lines should be drawn. It feels very high profile and very uncertain, and there will be battles and lines drawn in both a public and private sphere. So your CEOs and directors are going to feel pulled from pillar to post. Your staff are not necessarily going to be experiencing any of the change yet, but they are seeing all of this battling playing out. So that's what's happening currently. As the lines are drawn and we get more certainty in terms of exactly, who's merging with who's coming together, what that landscape looks like, what we'll see then is a very task-driven approach where we focus very heavily on getting ready for a safe and legal vesting day. So during that time, that anxiety that's probably been held at the director level will then start to filter down to your heads of service. Oh my goodness, how are we going to work with this council, and how are we going to change these processes, and what is that going to look like? And we'll see power battles that previously were perhaps at a political level now happening at that more director head of service level. There will be a huge amount of pace, a huge amount of activity. It will be project managed within an inch of its life, and probably still stuff will be missed because that is just how it works. And it will feel like a huge amount of work and a high pace, and there'll be this big, if we can just get to this date vibe. And then after that, so the feedback that we've had from these interviews is that then you get to almost the real work. So everybody's energy levels are absolutely depleted because we've had this massive sense of pace, this massive sense of all this work to do. And then all of a sudden we've gone live, and now we realize there's 50 million things we haven't thought of. We've got a mismatch of cultures, of people. There's the damage that may have been done through this period of uncertainty is now really coming to the fore. The them and us vibes are really coming out. The kind of complexities around where people are from and their sense of identities really come out. So I feel like this is quite a depressing start, but I think it is useful to just bear in mind they are 3 quite distinct phases. And I know some of you will be on fast track, and some of you will have you'll all have very different experiences because you'll all have different members, you'll all have different kind of politics playing out. So it will be different, but I think you will probably all go through those 3 stages. And in terms of thinking about what the impact is on people, it's probably worth thinking about those 3 stages separately. So, key themes that have come out of the research. So first of all, recruitment and retention came out really strong as something that people wished. And we asked the question a lot, if you were going through this again, what would you do differently? So recruitment and retention was a real challenge. And I've seen some research by Solace. I've seen some research by Tile Hill, who are a recruitment agency, that really supports this, that there's been a bit of a shoot up in people saying, well, I might start looking for another job. It's a difficult challenge, that. And actually one person said that they really wished that they'd had much more honest conversations with their senior staff much earlier to say, right, we've got this 3-year triathlon ahead of us. This is what that is going to look like. We don't know what your job specifically will look like at the end of it, but these are the opportunities during that time. And they wish they'd engaged more to try and get a sense of where people were at this point in time. The middle management pressure came out really strongly, and I think that does play out when you think about those different stages. I mean, obviously I don't know everybody that's on the call, I don't know what levels you are, but different people will experience this change at different points in time. And at the point when you need your middle managers, as you're like in stage two, getting ready for vesting day, they may have had very minimal exposure to all of this conversation that chief execs and directors may have had. So it's worth bearing in mind that that middle manager level probably needs support now rather than later. Political dynamics came out really strong. My colleague Georgia, who's on the call, who I'm sure will share her reflections, she went through this with BCP, that where there was a big discussion and debate and actually resistance to it, and that resulted in a delay of almost a year at a political level, which meant that the deadline to go live was actually really contracted. Those political dynamics are very, very dominant at the moment in this stage, and are something that I know you'll all be acutely aware of. It can be very challenging. Fear and uncertainty, always challenging when you're going through any change program, and particularly at the different stages, that fear and uncertainty will be happening at different levels, and it will be happening for different reasons. So at the moment, the fear and uncertainty is we don't even know what this looks like. Just before go live, the fear and uncertainty might be we haven't got any IT systems that work collaboratively across all councils. So something about building up people's resilience and ability to deal with that fear and uncertainty is really crucial, because we can't really reduce it. We are in for a long haul of it. Lots of stuff came out around practical challenges. So some examples of this, which actually one of them links to the recruitment and retention, was people wish that they'd thought about some of this earlier, because it has a massive impact on the staff. So little things like, well, then their badge doesn't work, so they can't get into this building. One person who I interviewed talked about how a policy decision was made about returning to the office because their vesting day was not long after COVID. And a decision was made about, right now everybody's going to be based in this office this number of days a week, which resulted in resignations. There is something about all those little practical decisions really just bearing in mind that you're thinking those through from a people perspective as well, because they can become much bigger deals than perhaps they feel like they should. Power issues, really common in any sort of organisational change. People will be motivated by certain things. People will all have strong opinions about, how things should be done, whether that's, again, the political level or down to the service delivery level. Service delivery and performance was a theme that came out. People were very aware that their general ability to run business as usual dipped during this process. So in terms of a lesson, because we still got to empty the bins, really thinking about that and being able to make sure that wherever possible you can maintain that level of stability in service as you go through this is something that people said if they were going through it again, they definitely give more attention to. Culture clashes, really obvious one. When you're right at the beginning, you can imagine it right at the beginning. But then when you get into that middle bit where it's all about pace and making sure you deliver everything on time, this gets lost. And I see that in organizations, like when we're going through this sort of change, but in any sort of change program, we start off with the best intention and then we get into delivery and implementation mode and we forget about culture. And then all of a sudden it goes live and it doesn't land and it's not working, and it's because we didn't do the culture work. So people really acknowledge that. And finally, the timing of service redesign was interesting, because when you look at the three phases that we just described, you don't really have time to do proper service redesign in the middle. You can't do it at the beginning because you don't know what the actual structure is going to be. So you end up doing it after go live, but almost everybody I interviewed wished that they'd done more of it before go live. And felt that they didn't have the time to do this to the depth that they wish they were able to do it. So I think that's another thing that's worth just flagging. So Georgia, you did quite a few interviews. Do you have any examples or anything that came out strongly for you?
Yeah, there's a few points that are probably worth sharing that people might find interesting. Just quite a common theme around kind of that politics, and particularly, it feels like when you're in it that it's that the senior officer leadership that's getting dragged into the politics and the disinformation and the countering the different positions. But actually, what people talked about was that, your staff and your partners, they see what's in the press, they still read the local media online. So all of that is filtering down right across your organization, whether it's true or whether it isn't. And they're seeing that those power plays play out, which is fueling that uncertainty, fueling that anxiety across your whole staff base. So that kind of really important piece of having good communications, a central place where people know there's a single version of the truth, whether and so they know how to access it, absolutely came out really, really, really strongly, I would say, and kind of probably linked across to the sort of more the kind of the officer power dynamic. Or was very much how it was driven around those personal agendas. People positioning for, are they looking to exit, are they looking to progress, are they looking to do they feel they're they've got parity with colleagues. And one person I interviewed talked about, in fact more than one, lots of job title changes, to give, suddenly a head of service was an associate assistant director, or suddenly a manager was a head of service, to give that parity, because people were already thinking about, am I going to get slotted in? Am I going to be more at risk at this level or this level? So that was something that was coming out quite a lot.
Perfect. Rachel, what things were coming out with you?
I mean, one of the the beauty of these conversations that we've been having is that we've been doing them confidentially. So the people that I've been talking to have been going, these are all of my fears around local government reorganisation as a senior leader. And I think there's a few things. So first of all, it's okay to be scared and worried, and this is change, and we know that it doesn't go, it plays to our emotions. But as leaders, we have to be stony faced and have our game face on. But some of the biggest fears that the people were confessing were around recruitment and retention. So we know that recruitment and retention is difficult in local government as it is. We know that there are some departments that are really struggling to attract younger people, new talent, fresh talent, and we have an aging workforce in local government as it is. But some of the fears that senior leaders are having in particular is around recruiting and retaining that middle to senior level that you've been talking about, Lucy, that heads of service, team leader, manager level, that know or see that there might be the jobs that are amalgamated into one across a new unitary. So the fear is there, and some people will jump ship early. Some people will stick it out and see what it is. But some of the sort of plans around that were around things like upskilling staff now, addressing this uncertainty now, advertising the opportunities and possibilities and options that people may have in the future, but really emphasising that now. And when recruiting, being upfront about it and saying, this is an organisation going through massive change, therefore this is an opportunity for you to get on board at a really critical point and to help us plan the new organisation the way that we want it to be. So it's not all doom and gloom, but there is massive sort of worries around recruitment and retention because we know it is difficult enough already. Take planning, for example. Planners are like hen's teeth at the moment. Health and safety staff, revenues and benefits staff. It is really difficult to get people on board. So upskilling and sort of that middle management layer, but equally there's some concerns around business as usual. So we know that this is enormous local government reorganisation, and it's likely occupying the brain space of everybody at a senior level at the moment if you're in a district that's about to be reorganised. But you also have business as usual. You also have statutory responsibilities. So, it's about juggling and managing that through change and being able to either bring in external resource or sort of delegate to staff or to empower people to sort of take a really bottom-up approach to some of it. But those are the biggest fears: retention and staff, and business as usual. How are we going to operate whilst going through this massive fundamental change? And I would imagine that resonates mostly with quite a lot of people on the call.
Thank you, Rachel. So that is a very quick summary, and this is a live piece of research. We're still interviewing people, we're still pulling all of this together. It's very much a live product, and I think we'll be working on this and running sessions like this throughout the 3-year period, to be honest. But in terms of the reflections of what people that have been through it before from that people perspective, I think that is a fair summary. What I wanted to just share with you now is some of the psychology stuff that we use across lots of different programs and how I think they link in. So what can the academics and the people that know about brains tell us about what could go on in this period of time? That is animated wrong on my screen. Never mind. So the change curve is something that is really, really commonly used. It's not one that I use massively. The reason I don't use it massively is because the top one on the right-hand side is actually my experience of how it goes. I don't think people necessarily go through it in the right order at the right time. But where I thought it was worth actually just looking at this from an LGR perspective is the one on the bottom right. Is bearing in mind that even if we did all go through it in the right order, that awareness that is going to be staggered, and also the awareness that the depth of the curve is likely to be shallower for your more experienced staff. So when you look at your chief execs have probably been through big change programs before, they've probably learned some personal resilience, they've probably learned how to manage their emotions because they've probably got more years in the service. And so their change curve will start much sooner because they're involved in it now, and it will be shallower. But as we go through that period of time, the change will then hit the directors a little bit later, it will then hit the managers a bit later, and it'll then hit the staff a little bit later. And as you get to people with less experience, that curve, that startness of that curve will increase. So again, without being too depressing, like that change curve is almost having stops and starts throughout this period. So that is worth remembering. And the reason why I'm going to labour that point is because I'm assuming a lot of people on the call are people leaders. You will have ended up having a lot more time to engage with this and get used to it than your staff will. And by the time they're in their pits of despair, their bottom bit, you're up here and you're over it. So bearing that in mind, because it's going to try your patience, because they'll be going through the pain after you. So that is something that's definitely worth considering. Really good old-fashioned, you'll all have heard of this, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's basically about motivation and how we need certain things in place in order to be our best self. LGR hits those bottom levels. It hits that physiological, can I put food on my table? It hits that psychological safety because suddenly I'm working with people who I don't know and there's power battles going on. And it hits that sense of belonging because you're taking away somebody's sense of belonging to the organisation that many people may have worked at for a long time, and it's part of their identity, and they might live in that place as well. So, so it's really hitting those three levels. So that is worth bearing in mind. This is called the transitions model by Bridges, and it's one that I come back to constantly. I much prefer this model over things like Cotter and ADCAR. And the concept of this is that we have, we think about change in terms of endings, a neutral zone, and a new beginning. What I think is fascinating about LGR is the ending is actually quite profound. So some people that I interviewed talked about having and described it as it felt like a wake just before go live, like wow, we're closing this council down after however many years it's been open, and there are people that have had generations of their family working here. So that process of ending is really important. The neutral zone, where you are living out of a suitcase, is a protracted period of time. So my advice to clients is always contract that as much as you can, but you can't with this. It is going to be a 3-year job. So that is worth considering. And that new beginnings, that sense of, right, we've got here, actually with LGA is a false start. So we're not going through these three in order. We're doing almost the endings and the let go at the end of the 3-year period just before we go live, which doesn't feel right. We're asking people to live in the neutral zone now. And then when we go live, we've got this false sense of a new beginning, but then we're going to go straight back into the neutral zone, or possibly even the endings, as we figure out at a more detailed level how we run services and how they might be different. So again, we can see, looking at the models that are how to do change well, it's going to be a challenge doing this change well. And then this is not a change theory. This is, again, a motivation theory. But what it talks about is that in the workplace, people basically have these 3 needs in order to be able to motivate themselves and in order to be able to get their sense of job satisfaction. So that is autonomy, when we do well, when we've got a sense of autonomy about how we work. Relatedness, we really need to have good relationships with people that we work with. That's why the saying, people join a job but leave a manager, is so prevalent. And people want to have a sense of competence. They want to be good at their job, generally speaking. There's always the odd bad egg, but generally speaking, these are true for all of us. And again, local government reorganisation potentially does impact all these three, because we've got this long period of time where we don't have a lot of autonomy. We're in this political stage. We're waiting to see what happens. The relationships are all going to be new because we're going to be working with different people than we were before. And that sense of being good at your job is being challenged, because if you are merging with 5 other councils and they are all doing your service area in 5 different ways, all of a sudden, is your way a good way of doing your job? That sense of competency is being challenged a little bit. So now that's not to say we can't use this to our favour. What I would be doing now is thinking about how do we actually amplify these 3 things. So whether it's at that director level at the moment or at head of service level, I'd be really thinking about where can we give them that autonomy? Where can we bring people together to say, well, you get to design like a new way of working here. So let's hand over some autonomy. How do we start to build those relationships way before go live, which again is bringing people together? And how do we get to build that sense of pride and competency and the potential opportunities of new ways of working? So although this one does illustrate why this could be challenging, it also gives you a tool and a framework for thinking about, if we meet these 3 needs, then that's going to help people to move through this journey. So I think that is a powerful one, and I do use this one quite a lot. Cats and cheese, which I'm conscious I could talk at you all day about some psychological theories. There's some really fascinating work, which is, the formal name is reinforcement sensitivity theory, but it is basically about how we respond to risk and reward. And we call it cats and cheese because it was done on mice and rats, and they basically exposed mice and rats to the scent of cats for risk and cheese for reward. And then they looked at whether the mice behave differently, and they do, and so do people. So there are individual differences between us in that some of us are motivated when there is a threat, and some of us are motivated when there is a reward. Now, you will see this play out through this process, because you'll have some people in your teams that see the reward and the opportunity of making change happen, radically transforming services, making new colleagues, and they will be really energized by that. And then you will also see some people who are very threatened by, is it safe and legal? What if we do something wrong? What if we don't engage with the public properly and we end up in court? What if we make mistakes? And their attention will be dominated by the risk. Now, in a good team, you need a mixture and a professional tension between them, but it is important to reflect on it's a natural individual difference between us. And some of us are actually really motivated by both. I'm really motivated by both on the scores, which means I'm an emotional mess because I'm constantly chasing something exciting and terrified it'll go wrong. But then we also have some people who may become your unsung heroes over this 3-year period, who are not actually motivated by either. They're really good at staying the course. So I think that conversations like this and starting to unpick, right, where do we need to be focusing on the cheese and where do we need to be focusing on the cats, because the stakes are high. I think being able to have those conversations in a grown-up place with a fun tool like this is really helpful, because it's not you're being reckless or you're being risk averse. It's a more kind of gentle way of having the conversation, and it's definitely a behavioural trait that I really do see a lot in organisations that are going through change. So the one thing I would say to concentrate on way, way, way earlier than you probably think you need to, or even think you are able to, is taking a really strong workforce-driven approach to change. So what I would be doing as quickly as you possibly can is getting people together, and this is probably in stage 2 rather than stage 1. You can maybe do it with chief execs and directors in stage 1, but I think doing it with sort of more heads of service and managers in stage 2. We cannot co-design the what. The what is being designed by the government and the politicians. We can't actually co-design that. We don't know what this will look like. And by the time we do know what this will look like, we don't have the control over it anymore. So what we need to co-design is the how. So if the what is, Council A, B, and C are being disbanded, and Council D is going to be a new unitary above all of them, then the question is not, is that right? What do we do? The question is, how do we do it? And I think if you can get together groups of people from across those councils to start having those conversations, just 3 to 5 workshops over the next kind of year or so, the dividends that that will pay, even though it won't be definite, even though, you know, you won't necessarily have a completely designed service at the end of it, what you will have is a group of people that know each other, have built relationships, that have started to get a sense of autonomy, that have started to get a sense of competence about their work. And it will allow those people to start to get ready for this change, rather than concentrating solely on that safe and legal bit and then going live. At that point, what you've got is the same group of people, but they don't know each other. They feel hurt because they've not been engaged enough through the process. There are power battles that, you know, this council's bigger than this one and they didn't listen to us, because they've not worked through that journey as you go through the process. You're just bumping the problem down the line, and it's not a great amount of resource to just get some of those things up and running. So I would strongly recommend that, because it's really backed by psychology that doing stuff with people does really, really help. And then Georgia, what tips have you got for us in terms of stakeholder engagement?
Wow, that's a whole nother LGR webinar in itself. But in short, we did a lot of talking about this. A lot of stuff came out of the interviews. But in simple terms, you know, through every single stage, whether you're dealing with your kind of your strategic delivery partners, you know, the NHS, blue lights, large business organisations, whether it's your kind of grassroots community groups and organisations who really represent particular groups or areas within your community, or whether it's your staff, actually they want a blend. They need a blend of reassurance. We've got this. We're on top of it. We're planning for it. We care about you and what you need. They need some inspiration. It might feel tough, but things will be better. There's a reason for this. It will improve. And they need relevant information, need to know where to get that. And of course, what that looks like and how it's packaged and how it's delivered depends on who you're talking to and what their context is. But always apply, you know, that I'd rather mercenarily call the what's in it for me factor. That makes it sound very selfish, and these stakeholders are not, it's not how I think of them really, but, you know, come at it from their perspective. Why do they care about this? Why does it matter for them? What is the impact on them? And whether that's a strategic partner who's thinking, hang on, what about our geographical footprint, for example? Is it aligned with how we provide NHS services and frontline care? Is that going to mess up? Are we going to have to redesign some of these delivery partnerships? That's a big deal. Is it a very localized community group that's got some really good relationships with community development staff, or good partnerships with VCS on delivery, and they're worried about, is my group going to be less important to this new council? Are these vulnerable people that I look after and work with suddenly not as important, or have got so much funding any longer? And of course, your staff will be around, as Lucy's talked about extensively already, job security. Can I put food on the table? Can I pay my mortgage? Can I pay my rent? Can I get out? What's my exit package look like? Is there scope for progression? Am I better than this person over here doing it in this other council who I know I'm going to be up against when the job comes? And what is the process for deciding that? And is it fair? So they're just some examples, but all the way through, I would say it's quite a difficult balance to strike, actually, that balance between reassurance and inspiration. Certainly when we launched BCP, we very much painted an inspiring picture of, this is where we're going to be. This is we're going to be the Southern economic powerhouse. This is about economic growth. This is about prosperity. This is about a city by the sea. It's really inspiring. It's really great for jobs and economy and skills. Actually, what we wanted to say on day one, moving into that kind of in between stage that Lucy talked about, was actually on day one, nothing really changes. Nothing much actually happens. We all just go to work and we all do the same thing, and your service is going to be the same. And yes, it will be the same bin crew. So it's quite difficult but important to get that balance right between those two things. And that's why having that relevant information and people knowing where and how to access it and who to access it from is so important. So that's it for now.
Thank you. So, so what I was going to do next is do a, right. So this is based on all that information, and I'm really conscious that was a lot of information. And normally our change chats are a lot more kind of interactive, but I wanted to sort of give you that download of, we've done this research. This is what wider research is telling us. This is how we think all this fits together. And what I'm going to do now is share with you some things for you to think about at each of those different stages. But before I do, is there any reflections or questions or anything that anybody would like to share or ask? Does it feel about right? Are you seeing the things that we're describing?
I can see nodding heads, Lucy. I can see a lot of people going like this, and quite a few people down taking notes as well, which is always a good sign.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll go into the what next. And oh, go on, Catherine.
Hello, I'm Catherine Monk from Reigate and Banstead Borough Council in Surrey. We're going through LGR at the moment. I'm just interested in terms of how you go about it. So if you're already working across different councils, how do you go about shaping like values and culture before you're all there? Where do you start with that?
Yeah, so I have a somewhat unpopular opinion about values. I think that they are less important than some people think they are, because I think that the way people experience culture is often very disconnected from what we say our values are. So I think there's absolutely a piece of work to be done, and I'll come to Georgia to share her thoughts after me, because Georgia will have done this from her comms perspective. There's absolutely a piece of work to do to shape up the values of the new organisation, but it really is in the day-to-day of how things work. So I would be focusing on what you think you want your new values to be, because they're not that different from one council to the next, and making sure that we are leading this change in a way that promotes that. So generally people want their teams to be collaborative. We want people to be community focused. We want people to be professional and respectful. And, you know, I bet if everybody wrote their council's 5 values in the chat now, they'd probably all be quite similar. So the challenge, I think, the focus needs to be on how do you do this change in a way that demonstrates those values, because staff are super paying attention. They're paying attention to how it feels speaking to that colleague from the council next door that they've never spoke to before, that might be their boss 3 years from now. They are paying attention to everything. So it's about making sure that we live and breathe what we want that experience to be going forward. But Georgia, you'll have done the whole redoing the values thing, I'm sure, at BCP.
Yeah, we did, and very much as Lucy has said, in that actually live it and breathe it. So that element, for example, around service design, or not safe landing of services, was delegated to the people who know those services. So for even in my team in comms and marketing, you know, I had colleagues from three different councils coming together. We put the digital, the social media experts together, the media relations experts together, the comms guys together, the web guys together. You guys, you look at how you do things now. You look at the different platforms you're on, the different processes you use, different policies that you've got in place governing the way that you do work. And you come back with a recommendation for this is how it's going to be. So there was all kind of values moving up the organization, because that was demonstrating trust, it was demonstrating collegiate and collaborative approaches, it was demonstrating value on expertise, all those things that you wanted to see in your organization. And because that was driven from the program, it wasn't just me doing that. That's an example in my team, but actually that's how it was done across the whole council. Those values they're coming from a kind of very kind of process-led program point of view, because as Lucy said, that is necessary, because it is that kind of laser focus on vesting day. There's no flexibility around that, but it was put in a way that everybody was experiencing it and everybody knew that. And then the comms could say, you know, all these groups, all these staff, they're all involved, they're all owning, they're all leading, they're all deciding between them the best way to take that forward. So yeah, it was kind of top down and kind of bottom up, and you know, met in the middle.
And I think there is something about starting that work as soon as you possibly can. Go on, Rachel.
I can't find the yellow hand. Zoom is killing me and you today, Lucy. I would say I popped it in the chat as well around culture mapping now. So like you need just a baseline or a starting point as to where these different organisations need to come to. So I've merged different teams before now, and 10 years later, they were still calling them there was Rosendale Borough Council, but the Rosendale lot who merged with someone else. And sort of they had a very distinct culture, they had their norms, they had the language that they used, and they didn't necessarily integrate. But understanding what your baseline is, whether you've got a load of cats in one council and a load of people who are motivated by cheese in another, for example, and how to kind of bridge those gaps, I think it's worth looking at what exists and understanding your baseline now. Where are those problems? Because this is an opportunity to iron out those problems as well. This is an opportunity to say the new culture will not accept these behaviours and these visible sort of, you know, problems that we know that we're already having. But doing that now and then understanding the gap that you need to bridge, I think will be invaluable, rather than just getting everybody in together and going, and now what? You know, you'd be losing an awful lot of time, whereas you can go into it with a plan to bring them together.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Okay, so I'm going to go into our what our advice, basically, what I think we need to be thinking about. So I've split these into your 3 phases so you can have a think about that in terms of planning ahead. So at the moment, what's happening is your politics will play out, and really what you need to make sure you're doing is minimize any damage of that. So the damage of that is not deliberate in any way, shape or form, but staff, as I said, are paying attention. They're paying attention to what is said publicly about who wants to be with which council, and that they feel that. So I would look to minimise the damage of that. And I spoke to one chief exec who was basically massively ramped up the comms back to how it was during COVID times, where she personally is doing loads of video calls and video little short, sharp things, loads of staff engagement sessions, and is strongly putting out the message, unless you've heard it from me, it's not true. Because just because, you know, somebody said, well, this council end up with this one, or this council end up with this one. So becoming that trusted source of truth from a comms perspective at this stage is really, really important. And then the other thing I think it's really worth considering doing is remembering that your chief execs and your senior directors are hitting that change curve the first, and they are probably the ones most impacted, because, you know, we all know that we're going to need just the same number of people emptying the bins. We're going to need just the same number of people as housing officers. But what we're not going to need is 6 chief execs. So your top people are actually the most personally impacted by that Maslow hierarchy. They are probably more experienced in resilience, but they're still massively impacted by it. So I'd be doing direct work with them. I'd be doing some leadership stuff with them. I'd be doing some culture stuff with them. I'd be doing some resilience stuff with them, so that you are creating a safe place for them to handle their emotional impact and not filter it down, because the last thing you want is them filtering their sense of uncertainty down to everybody else. So leadership development, coaching, be doing that sort of stuff with that group of people. And I would be beginning succession planning conversations with leaders, because of that tip that somebody said about, I just wish we'd had more grown-up, honest conversations with senior people much earlier to stop people leaving because they couldn't see a future, when actually for most people in this, there will be a future of some point. So having those conversations and being able to turn that around, you're going to have autonomy to shape this, may reduce some of that recruitment and retention issues. And finally, you'll be in a very externally focused consultation with the public stage. We were actually just chatting just before the call, and both Georgia and Rachel were saying that is in fact quite a high risk area in this chaotic space at the moment. Do you want to just say why that was, Georgia?
Yeah, I was, we were reflecting on the gunning principles, weren't we? And I'm sure most people are familiar with those, but that requirement for engagement to take place at a formative stage. So, you know, unless you're on the real fast track, like you might be struggling in Surrey, but the rest of you know, the two-tier areas have at least got until September or November, but, you know, needs to take engagement at a formative stage. You need to provide appropriate information to people to be able to actually give an informed view. You need to allow adequate time. There is just about adequate time to do decent engagement for most, and you need to show due consideration. And I think one of the examples, due consideration of the views that you gather. I think one of the examples I gave earlier was I'd seen one, there's probably more, one council that had declared its preferred position before they'd closed the public engagement. And I thought, oh, that feels a bit vulnerable to me from a gunning principles point of view. I'm not a legal expert, but if I was in that space, I might be looking at that. But you know, so just make sure follow the gunning principles. And if you don't know them already, there's loads of great information on the LGA website. So go and have a look.
So when we get into the prep for vesting day, as we said, this is going to be pace. So you need your comms machine focusing on that pace, and being leading it, not sort of running after it and saying, oh yeah, we've got to tell you this. So that kind of real sense of momentum. That is when I would start that workforce approach to change. So as soon as you know what the structure is of the new redesigned councils in your area, and I mean literally just which councils are which, not necessarily your staffing structures, because often they don't happen till after go live anyway, I would start doing that workforce approach to change, because that is where you're starting people on that change curve much earlier rather than just starting on when it goes live. So I would really concentrate on that in that phase. I'd then do your leadership support on how to do change, what's normal, what emotional impacts are you going to see with your middle managers during this change as well, because you need them ready and able to deal with the rumour mills and the panic and all of that. So I'd be investing, I'd do your direct CEOs and directors now, I'd do your middle managers early on in this stage. Increase your capacity. This is a lot of work. I know you all know this is a lot of work, but it's a lot of work, and there will be funding available for you for capacity. So make sure you've got dedicated program managers, or whether you partner up with an organisation, just make sure. It's a lot of work, it really is. I'd be doing your culture mapping at the start of this stage, where you really start to understand, okay, what are the cultures in the different councils, so that you're ready for that. Make sure you get that balance right of talking about the future but acknowledging the history, and remember that transitions model, that those three phases are important, and people have a sense of identity to the council they work for, so be respectful of that. Just start your engagement and your co-production with your communities at this point, because again, like you have got a bit more clarity with the staff, you've got a bit more clarity in terms of how services are run, to work with your communities on that. Maintaining good practice you need to focus on, because they said there was a dip in performance during this time, so think about how you can avoid that dip in performance. And you'll be focusing on your new brand, which will also include your values and so on, but thinking about your brand as an organisation and your employer proposition brand at this point in time, I think is really important. And then post-launch is when the real work starts. So at that point, I think you'll be thinking about your capacity for doing restructures, service design. You'll be thinking about your directors and heads of support heads of service will need support here, because they will potentially be going through restructures at that point. You'll be needing to do really proactive culture work. So whereas in the middle stage, you'll be mapping and understanding the culture from the different organisations, once you go live, it'll be proactive. What is the kind of culture that we want to build in the new organisation? And with that comes that sense of identity. I'd be continuing that workforce driven approach to change, because that really is a continuous improvement tool. So you'll always be doing that anyway. And again, that frontline managers, real support for this is how to do change well. We're really, really guilty of not of teaching people how to be managers and on a business as usual assumption. So manager training is often, this is how you manage a budget, and this is how you have a conversation with a staff member, and it's not often throughout your entire career you're going to be dealing with change and this is how you do it. I think we neglect that. I know I'm biased, but I really do think we neglect that. I'd increase your capacity for staff events. I'd be running loads of staff events because you're building that identity. So get that comms machine up and running, and you'll be aggressively building external relationships as the new organisation with partners and again with community. So that is what I think will be happening at those 3 phases from a people and human being point of view. Is there any questions or reflections at this point? I feel like I've just talked at you all and it's been very formal. This is not how we run change chats if there is
Nothing
newbies.
in the chat, Lucy.
No, we're good to go. Is everybody just depressed? So general tips and advice. I'm sorry if I've depressed you. Always, and this is not to do with LGR, I say this to everybody, always engage with your people much earlier than you think you need to. It's a real tendency to lean back when we are uncertain, and actually we need to lean in, because just as we need to process that uncertainty, our people need to process that uncertainty, and they can't do that if we're not talking to them about it. So always don't wait until you know everything is perfect before you talk to people. Train leaders and managers up to handling change and the emotional impact of this now. I would start that work now. I would start thinking about how you want your organisation to do change well, how you want to embody your values, even though your values might be tweaked and changed in the new organisation. How do you lead now? And how do you get your leaders able to have conversations where people are just going bleh with emotion and they can make some sense and order of it? I think that's really, really important, because this is a long journey. I would start building up your approach to comms now, even though you don't necessarily know exactly what it looks like. Getting control of that rumour mill, building, whether it's comms champions, whether it's how you communicate with staff through your internet, whether it's staff events. Really be ramping that up. And I would really strongly recommend you to think about how you did that during COVID, because COVID was an emergency situation where we suddenly had to communicate with people an awful lot more than we usually did. So we've all done this before, and actually over something much, much more difficult than this, we've done this before. So think about how we did that. And mentally prepare for this journey, because you will be feeling this journey. And the fact that you have joined this call tells me that you are already involved in this, you're already impacted by this, and you already are going to be feeling and carrying this. You're carrying this before your colleagues are, because we're only at the beginning. So remember that that will be staggered, and that your journey may be earlier than other people's, but also it's really important to take care of yourselves and acknowledge that all of the psychology we've talked about today isn't just for the staff, it applies to you too. So in terms of how we can help you with those leadership workshops, when that facilitation. We're really good at getting order to the chaos of emotions when it's about change. So, whether it's sitting down with your leaders or your staff and they have this chaotic, but what about, we're really good at picking through all that and coming up with something that makes sense to people. We're also really good, Georgia is really good at building approach to comms and engagement, whether that's internal or external. If you need that support and advice, we can definitely help with that. And my specialism is how do we do change well from a psychology point of view. So if it is that kind of facilitating that workforce driven approach and teaching people in your organizations how to do that, I actually ran a training session on that this week for an organization that's a housing ALMO that's been brought back in-house. So very similar in terms of identity, power, a long period of time. All of that, we've trained up their people in how to do workforce driven approach to change, and we've seen a big change in terms of innovation, staff engagement. It's all shot up because it hits those three things around autonomy, competence and relationships. It really does work. And also additional capacity, because as I said, it is a huge amount of work. So if you want us as a change partner or just help and support them, we are here for you. We've almost run out of time, and I feel like this has been a really scary call. Like I've just bombarded you all with this is going to be terrible. But there are huge opportunities in this, and huge opportunities to do it well. I'm just conscious that the urgency of it, the sense of being done to of it, it can feel very overwhelming. So I wanted to as I said, try and put some order to the chaos for you as well, to say, right, these are the different phases, this is what you're going to see at those different phases, and these are some of the things that might help. Georgia, do you want to add anything?
Well, I was just going to counter the doom and gloom by saying, having been through this in Dorset and with BCP, and yes, I'm not taking away the fact that it's challenging, it can be difficult, there are those moments of it can be stressful at times. I still maintain it is the single thing I'm most proud of throughout my career, is of having been involved in. It's a brilliant thing to be involved in. You get a massive sense of achievement from being involved. So you will get that. You might not get it until you've come through it, but you will get it. So stick with it, folks. It will be worth it.
Thank you so much, Georgia. So are there any other questions? I have put a couple of links in the chat of our next 2 change chats. One's about dealing with emotional demands in housing, and the other is about, again, organisational psychology. I will also put our email address and my LinkedIn. It is an ongoing piece of research, this. It's very live, and as you guys go through your journey, we have actually had quite a number of LGRs in the last 5 years, during COVID as well. So there is a lot of good people out there with a lot of good learning to take forward. So we're going to continue the research, and we'll keep running sessions like this. But yeah, any questions, and do feel free to put them in the chat. Thank you to everybody that's putting all the thank you comments in.
Do we share the slides, Lucy, afterwards? What happens with the
I
recording?
can do, yeah. So we will send out to everybody that was registered. We don't normally have slides, but we can send out to everybody that's registered the link to the recording. So if you want to share it with any colleagues, then you're very welcome to. And also the slides. It'll probably be early next week, because our marketing person has to edit some bits out, like us at the beginning having a tantrum about Zoom because we can't get it to work properly. You probably don't want that, so she'll call that out, and then we'll send you the link to the recording and the slides if that's helpful. Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. Best of luck. Reach out to us anytime, even if it's just for a moan. That counts as research for us, so it's fine to moan to us if you just need to moan to somebody outside of the organisation. And yeah, do let us know if we can help you with anything, and hopefully we'll see you at future change chats.